Zambia just cut off America's copper supply. Tech industry in crisis mode in a move sending shockwaves across global markets. Zambia has cancelled a major copper shipment bound for the United States. This isn't just a trade hiccup, some of the biggest American tech companies are now sounding alarms, warning of potential shortages that could ripple across the entire tech industry. Why did Zambia take this drastic step? How will it affect American technology production? And what does it mean for Zambia's role in the global copper market? Stay with us as we break down this unfolding story and reveal what's really happening behind the headlines. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. Well, it's been quite a week here, and I hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. Before we dive into today's main story, I just want to say thank you for the incredible support on our last video. Your comments, your insights, they really do fuel what we do here and now. Today we're covering something that has sent shockwaves through the global tech industry, something that could fundamentally reshape the balance of power in the digital age. Picture this: the sun rises over the vast copper mines of Zambia's copper belt, mines that have for decades fed the insatiable appetite of Western technology. The hum of machinery, the dust-choked air, the sweat of thousands of workers extracting the red metal that powers our smartphones, our electric vehicles, our data centers. For generations, this copper has flowed westward, a river of wealth that has built Silicon Valley's gleaming towers while leaving behind scarred earth and impoverished communities. But what happens when that river suddenly runs dry? What happens when a nation that has been treated as little more than a resource depot decides it will no longer play by rules written in Washington and London? What happens when the suppliers of the world's most critical industrial metal decide they've had enough of exploitation, enough of watching their natural wealth disappear while their people remain poor? Can the American tech industry survive without Zambian copper? Can your iPhone be manufactured? Can Tesla build its electric dreams? Can the AI revolution continue when the very circuits that power artificial intelligence can no longer be made? And perhaps most provocatively, is this a desperate economic gambit by a struggling African nation, or is it the beginning of a resource revolution that will see the global south finally claim its seat at the table of power? Is this Zambia acting alone, or are we witnessing the opening salvo in a coordinated campaign by resource-rich nations to finally, definitively, break free from the chains of neo-colonial extraction? The questions are staggering. The implications are profound. And the stakes? They couldn't be higher. Factual foundation. The revelation came to light in the first week of December 2024, when Zambia's newly elected president, Hakainde Hichilema, made an unexpected announcement during a joint press conference with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Lusaka. The context here is crucial. Zambia is the world's seventh largest copper producer, accounting for roughly 5% of global copper supply. But within Africa, it stands as the second largest producer after the Democratic Republic of Congo. For the United States and European tech manufacturers, Zambian copper has been considered a stable, reliable source, unlike supplies from politically volatile regions. The initial signs of trouble emerged in October 2024, when Zambian officials quietly began renegotiating contracts with Western mining companies. At the time, industry analysts dismissed these moves as routine fiscal adjustments. Zambia has been struggling with massive debt, much of it owed to Chinese creditors, and observers assumed the government was simply trying to squeeze more tax revenue from mining operations. But on December 3, President Hichilema dropped the bombshell: Zambia would be immediately suspending all copper exports to the United States and redirecting its entire export capacity toward China, along with emerging bilateral agreements with India, Turkey, and several Gulf states. The announcement was not made in isolation. It came at the conclusion of a three-day state visit by President Xi, during which China agreed to forgive approximately $6 billion of Zambia's bilateral debt and pledged an additional $8 billion in infrastructure investments over the next 5 years. The quid pro quo was unmistakable: Zambia's copper would flow east, not west. Within 72 hours, the London Metal Exchange saw copper prices spike by 18%. American tech companies went into emergency session. The Pentagon convened a crisis meeting about supply chain vulnerabilities. And across Africa, leaders from mineral-rich nations began watching closely, wondering if Zambia had just written the playbook for resource sovereignty in the 21st century. By December 8, the U.S. State Department had dispatched a high-level delegation to Lusaka, but President Hichilema refused to meet with them, instead sending junior ministers to hear what the Americans had to say. The message was clear: the era of taking Zambia for granted was over. Direct evidence. President Hichilema's words at the December 3 press conference have since been analyzed and reanalyzed by every think tank and policy institute in the Western world. Here's what he said, standing beside President Xi. For too long, Zambia has been treated as a mine shaft with a flag on top. We extract copper from our earth, copper that belongs to the Zambian people. And we watch it leave our borders at prices dictated by London, by New York, by markets that care nothing for the schools we cannot build, the hospitals we cannot staff, the roads we cannot pave. We have been told for decades that we must play by the rules of the global market. That we must be competitive. That we must welcome foreign investment with open arms and ask for nothing in return except the privilege of selling our birthright at whatever price the market will bear. Well, I am here to tell you today that Zambia has new partners. Partners who do not lecture us about democracy while extracting our wealth. Partners who do not impose conditions on their assistance while their companies pay poverty wages in our mines. China has extended its hand in genuine partnership, and we have grasped it firmly. When asked by a Reuters journalist whether this move would damage Zambia's relationships with Western nations, President Hichilema did not hesitate. Damage our relationships? Our relationships have been damaged for 100 years. Show me the American schools built with copper profits. Show me the British hospitals funded by mining revenues. What I see is gleaming office parks in California powered by Zambian copper, while our people live without electricity. So, you tell me, who has damaged this relationship? The question and answer session grew heated. A CNN correspondent pressed the issue. Question, Mr. President, critics say this is simply trading one master for another. That you're moving from Western dependence to Chinese dependence. How do you respond? I respond by saying that China has canceled $6 billion in debt. What has America offered? Lectures. Criticism. Sanctions threats. China is building a railway line from Lusaka to Dar es Salaam that will transform our trade capacity. What is America building? So, yes, let the critics talk. My people will judge me by whether their lives improve, not by whether Washington approves of my choices. Meanwhile, in Washington, the response has been swift and alarmed. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo spoke to CNBC on December 5. This is a very concerning development. Copper is absolutely critical to American manufacturing, to our tech sector, to our national security infrastructure. We have alternative suppliers, certainly, but Zambian copper has been a significant component of our supply chain. We're exploring all options to address this disruption. When pressed on what those options might include, Secretary Raimondo became notably less specific. We're in discussions with allies and partners. We're looking at domestic production capacity. We're evaluating strategic reserves. But I want to be clear, this kind of resource nationalism is dangerous. It's dangerous for Zambia, it's dangerous for the global economy, and it ultimately hurts the very people these leaders claim to be helping. Tech industry leaders have been more blunt. An unnamed executive from a major Silicon Valley manufacturer told Bloomberg, "This is an absolute nightmare. We're talking about potential production delays, cost increases, supply chain chaos. And it's not just about finding alternative sources, it's about the signal this sends. If other African nations follow Zambia's lead, if we see this kind of coordinated action, the entire electronics industry is going to have to fundamentally rethink how it operates." Deeper analysis. What we're witnessing here goes far beyond a simple trade dispute or bilateral diplomatic friction. This is a fundamental challenge to the architecture of global resource flows that has existed since the end of colonialism, or perhaps more accurately, since the transition from direct colonial rule to economic neocolonialism. Let's be clear about the numbers. Africa possesses roughly 30% of the world's mineral reserves. The continent is home to 90% of the world's platinum, 90% of its chromium, 60% of its cobalt, 50% of its manganese, and vast quantities of copper, gold, diamonds, uranium, and rare earth elements. Yet Africa accounts for only about 3% of global GDP. This is not an accident. This is not a failure of African entrepreneurship or governance. This is the deliberate result of systems designed to extract wealth from Africa and transfer it northward. The Zambian copper industry provides a perfect case study. Foreign mining companies, primarily from Canada, Australia, and the UK, have operated in Zambia for decades under concessionary agreements that granted them extraordinary privileges, tax holidays, relaxed environmental regulations, permission to repatriate profits without restriction, and minimal requirements for local employment or technology transfer. According to a 2023 report by the African Tax Administration Forum, Zambia loses approximately $3 billion annually to tax avoidance schemes employed by multinational mining corporations. That's roughly equivalent to the country's entire health budget. Meanwhile, copper mine workers in Zambia earn an average of $200 to $300 per month, while their counterparts in Australian copper mines earn $6,000 to $8,000 monthly for comparable work. Dr. Yash Tandon, the Ugandan economist and former executive director of the South Center, has been arguing for years that African nations must leverage their resource wealth strategically rather than simply accepting whatever terms Western corporations offer. In a 2024 paper published just months before the Zambian announcement, he wrote, "The tragedy of Africa is not that it lacks resources, but that it has been convinced that possessing resources is itself insufficient for development." African leaders have been taught to believe that they must attract foreign investment, must create friendly business environments, must compete with each other to offer the lowest taxes and weakest regulations. This is madness. Nations with leverage should use it. It appears President Hichilema has taken that advice to heart. The reaction from African civil society has been mixed but largely supportive. Across social media platforms, hashtags like #CopperSovereignty and #ZambiaFirst have trended throughout the continent. Young Africans in particular seem energized by what they see as a long overdue assertion of African agency. But there are skeptics, even within Africa. Some worry about Chinese influence replacing Western influence without fundamentally changing the extractive relationship. Others fear economic retaliation from the United States and European Union. And some simply doubt that Zambia has the institutional capacity to manage such a dramatic geopolitical pivot without suffering economic chaos. Professor Grieve Chelwa, an economist at the University of Cape Town, offered a nuanced take in an interview with the Africa Report. "I understand the impulse to celebrate this as an anti-colonial victory, and I share the sentiment that Africa must be more assertive about resource sovereignty. But we must also be realistic. Zambia is trading one dependency for another. Chinese loans come with their own strings attached. Chinese mining operations in Africa have not been paragons of labor rights or environmental protection. So yes, applaud the assertiveness, but demand that this benefits ordinary Zambians, not just a different set of foreign investors." From a legal and procedural standpoint, Zambia's actions sit in a gray area of international law. The country has not nationalized foreign mining operations. At least not yet. It has simply redirected export flows, which is technically within its sovereign rights. However, many of the mining contracts signed with Western companies include clauses guaranteeing market access and non-discriminatory treatment. Legal challenges are almost certainly coming. The Pentagon, meanwhile, has classified copper as a critical mineral for national security purposes. This designation could potentially trigger emergency authorities that would allow the U.S. government to invoke Cold War-era laws to secure supply, though the practical mechanisms for doing so remain unclear when the supplier is a sovereign nation acting within its legal rights. Perhaps most significantly, there are reports unconfirmed but persistent that Zambia is not acting alone. Diplomatic sources suggest that the Democratic Republic of Congo, which produces far more copper and cobalt than Zambia, has been in quiet negotiations with Chinese officials about similar arrangements. If the DRC follows Zambia's lead, the impact on global supply chains would be catastrophic for Western manufacturers. This raises the ultimate question: Are we watching the beginning of a coordinated resource sovereignty movement across Africa? Could this be the 21st century equivalent of OPEC's 1973 oil embargo, a moment when supplier nations collectively realized their power and decided to wield it? The implications are staggering, not just for the tech industry but for the entire architecture of global economic relations. So there you have it, viewers. Zambia has cut off America's copper supply, and the reverberations are only just beginning to be felt. Thank you so much for watching today's edition of InspirAfrica Official. This is a story we'll be following very closely in the weeks and months ahead because, honestly, this could be a turning point not just for Zambia, not just for Africa, but for how we think about resources, sovereignty, and power in our globalized world. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think Zambia is right to take this bold step? Is this genuine sovereignty or just trading one master for another? What should African nations do with their natural resources? Should the tech industry have seen this coming? Let's have that conversation respectfully, thoughtfully, but honestly. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from across the continent, more perspectives you won't get anywhere else, more of the context and analysis that help us all make sense of this rapidly changing world. Until then, I'm Nakash, and this has been InspirAfrica Official. Stay informed, stay inspired, and stay proud.